lost the winery in 17. We started applying for permits in 18. And usually they said because I think one thing that's important to mention is we weren't going to just get everything replaced. We did go and use this as an opportunity to really see how to position ourselves in the future. So there was a major modification permit, for example, that was submitted with expanded production, expanded hospitality use, which we're not planning to, max out anytime soon, but you also get these opportunities with the county just once, and it's becoming tougher and tougher every year to, navigate through these loopholes. So we said, why not use this as a chance to really build for the future? Ray has 2 daughters that he hopes will take over, so he just wanted to make sure he can give them something that allows them to then expand and put their ideas on the board as well. So that's kind of why it took a little bit more of a time. But then I think it would have been faster had we not had the pandemic and then the next set of 2020 fires. So we definitely did not anticipate multiple additional hurdles coming our way, which was unfortunate. But hindsight, I guess, 2020. Where we are with Signorello right now is just such a special moment. This is a winery that's had a legacy and a history of being in Napa for over 3 decades at this point, but we still have something very exciting to share with everyone, like talk about where the story is right now, how the rebuild is going. So patience is very important virtue when you're in the wine industry.
Yeah.
We are, yeah. That's the goal. Actually, the goal is to hopefully even finish it a little faster than that, so that we can 100% do the 2023 harvest on site. I think in terms of the actual infrastructure and getting the building ready, we might be able to, really just slide right into that finish line. It's really going to be about the county, and if we can get that operating permit in time for us to actually physically be able to use the building. So fingers crossed, that's the intention. But I think what the light at the end of this tunnel is that we know for a fact that 2023 vintage, ultimately will be made on site. It will be bottled on site, so we'll be able to kind of go back to that estate bottling, estate grown, just here in the next few months. It's very exciting. It's been a long journey to get here. No, absolutely no connection with drinking wine. My father has always been someone that's enjoyed scotch and whiskey, and that's, in general, India as a beverage consumer has always kind of leaned towards, it's been a beer drinking community. It's been spirits and, like rums, gins, but mainly whiskeys and scotches. And so those were the beverages I think I was aware of, but my background was in food engineering and technology, which was a relatively new subject in India at the time when I decided to pursue it for my undergrad. And the reason that I decided to pursue it was I just liked the subjects that were associated with it. If there was one thing I was clear about, it was that I didn't want to be the stereotype. Like, I didn't want to be the doctor or the engineer or the lawyer. I really wanted to do something that was a little bit more application-based. And so with food chemistry, the subjects of like biochemistry and microbiology had this really interesting cross-science aspect to it, and they were all application-based things. And so that's what I started to, pursue my career in, and winemaking came as a subset of that. So my initial experiences in the food industry was I worked with chocolate manufacturing. So I was in one of the Nestle production facilities in India that made like Kit Kat and a couple of other.
What a horrible gig. I feel so bad. Oh my God.
It was wonderful, but then after 3.5 months of being in quality control, I stepped on the scale and I was like, this is not a long-term life
the charm
decision.
Was wearing off.
Yeah. I still can't eat Kit Kat to this day,
I'm not surprised.
Because I've eaten so much of it. I still think it's a fantastic product. I've had my full. And then after that, I did food retail, like product development, which was very exciting. So we have in India it's called Food Bazaar, which is its own retail chain, like Safeways, or
Sure.
Trader Joe's. And so my job was to be on the product development side to develop our in-house products. And that was exciting, right? Because you got to be creative, you got to put something new on the shelf. But the products that you were asked to spend time working on were decided based on marketing data. So they said, if they said ketchup is selling really hot right now, we need our own version of ketchup, then that's what you worked on. But it was an aspect that allowed creativity, and winemaking kind of came out of that. So we would do a lot of field trips and discover food and beverage. Like there was a lot of big multinationals that were starting to invest in India and, put up production. So it was a really exciting time to be in it. And we visited Sula Vineyards, which is one of the bigger wineries in India at the moment. And it was just a wonderful day. It happened to be harvest. Everything smelled good. Everything was clean, which was important. And then at the end of the whole tour, where we talked about not just the science of winemaking, but the challenges of each vintage and, philosophy and the creative expression, all of that stuff, we ended up in the tasting room that overlooked the lake on their property, and, the sun was setting. We're tasting some wine, and it was pretty romantic. So, yeah, that was kind of my, how do you get into this kind of moment? And from there on, I just started reading as much as I could, any access to magazines or literature that I could find. And my uncle was in the food hotel industry, and so he had a lot of exposure to the international scene and especially to the wine scene and how it was growing. And so he was very supportive. He was the one who kind of pushed me to the point where I said, okay, I'm going to try and do this.
That's nice. That's really nice.
Well, it's age, definitely, because, you're young, you're trying to figure it out. But it was also the stigma associated with being in the alcohol industry. India is a relatively conservative country. And so for a girl to just go up to her parents that are both in academics and have assumed she would have a similar career. That was a fun conversation now in retrospect. And so to have someone like him kind of stand up and say, this is the future of the industry, this is what she can do, this is where she could head, it was nice. It was nice to have that support. I don't think, had I not had that, I am doubtful if I would still be in the industry. Well, so I started with, my parents had a very clear approach. They said, if you're going to do something, you have to do it well. And you have to do it with education being the cornerstone behind how you approach it. So it wasn't, okay, fine, just go get an internship and see what it's about. It was really learn your subject material before you go out there. And so I started applying to different colleges. Applied to the University of Adelaide in Australia, applied to 2 of the schools in Bordeaux, applied to the University of Dijon in Burgundy, and then, of course, applied to UC Davis because why wouldn't you apply to UC Davis for viticulture and enology? And I was fortunate that I got accepted. So I moved in 2009 to do my master's at Davis. And so I was in the school from 2009 to 11. And that was probably, that is the most defining formative experience for me because I was surrounded by some amazing, that people that are now professionals in the industry. Some of them had already had a career and had come back to school to study. So we had such a great mix of students that were new like me, that had really no background, and students that had worked and, knew their way around a winery and were kind of guiding forces. And of course, just the caliber of professors that you have at Davis is very well known. It needs very little introduction. So I found myself in very good company, people that, we had tasting groups and we would do all kinds of the small things that slowly add up to experiences. A lot of my colleagues that had worked at wineries would talk about what kind of wineries to work at, really how to think about shaping your career. So it was a defining moment for me. Oh, cellar rat to the core. That was something I think I decided from the very beginning. Even though my master's was viticulture and enology, I knew enology was what I wanted to do. Viticulture actually came in as a love, years after when I found my first full-time position. So I said, okay, I'm going to be in the cellar. I actually worked at Louis Martini while I was doing my master's project. So that was my very first harvest experience, but it also coincided with my master's project. So I was doing a little bit of both. And then from there, I went to Burgundy and worked at Hospice de Beaune, which completely, for me, defined single vineyard expression and single vineyard winemaking. Because that's really what Burgundy is about. You know, they talk about what the site gives you, and that site could be less than 50 feet away from the next site, but they're still very much able to define once again what that site does. So that was a really important experience for me, and that, you know, got to go live in Burgundy.
Yeah, what an awful thing again.
Yeah. So that was
Between
great.
that and Kit Kats, I mean, gosh.
Yeah, it's been a tough life.
Yes, it has.
And then from there, I went to Cognac because I just wanted.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I keep going down.
I just wanted the chance to stay in France longer, and Cognac's just an hour from Bordeaux, and so it was fun because now I was again doing winemaking, but winemaking for distilled spirits, which is a completely different ballgame. And while I was there, it was the time for blending of cognac, which is, again, a completely different idea from blending from wine. When you blend for wine, you're going for a style or a philosophy or a vintage aspect. But when you blend for cognac, you're just going for consistency, right? You want that product to taste the same every year that you release, unless you're doing a vintage-specific bottling. So that was different, but it gave me a chance to pop into Bordeaux on the weekends and learn more about, you know, that side of France and about winemaking there. So that was exciting. And then from there, I went to New Zealand and worked at St. Clair Family Estate. And that was different because now you're looking at volume. You know, we were bringing in 150 tons of Sauvignon Blanc on one specific day. So it was a completely different aspect of winemaking. And then from there, I went to India, and I worked in India for about a year. I was working for a barrel company called Tonellerie Gemtos, which was interested in opening up their market in India and talking to the Indian consumer about oak and oak alternative products. And I thought it was a good opportunity for me to learn about the market and see how I could position myself there. And so I did that for a year and established a market for them, and not just wines, but also from the spirit side of things. And it was interesting because it really gave me a chance to understand where India was, what the regions were, you know, who the players were, how they were moving. But I was in a phase where I felt like I was too young to be take a full-time position as a winemaker or a consultant, but I was too far ahead in terms of winemaking just based on the experiences I'd already had. Mm-hmm. So it was a weird kind of catch-22 almost. And so I said, okay, why don't I just get a little bit more experience, and that way when I come back, I can affirmatively take on a better role at whichever winery I apply to. And so I did that. I was to go to Australia. They got hit by hail that year, so I went to New Zealand and then ended up back in Napa, mainly because I met my now husband in New Zealand, who convinced me that, you know, it might be worth it to explore one more harvest in the United States. And all of my friends were here in Napa. You know, I had a good group of people that I could lean on, so I came here and worked at Stag's Leap Winery and stayed with them for about 9 months, where I worked as an intern, but also kind of because I was kept long term, I got to do a lot of the post-harvest stuff, which was great. And then from there, I got my first full-time job at Dalla Valle Vineyards, so I joined them in 2014. So we're www.signorelloestate.com. And that's the best place to get all of this information. We have a Twitter account, we have an Instagram, kind of the same, Signorello Estate. And so probably the best ways to follow our journey would be those outlets.